What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with this series of my 10 greatest NBA drafts of all time. So just do a brief recap. At number 10, I had the 1998 draft. At number 9, I had the 1999 draft. And at number 8, I had the 2009 draft. So at number 7, I have the 1987 NBA draft. Now, before I go forward, you see how like a lot of these drafts so far have been in an era where people keep telling you that basketball was weak. 1999, 1998, now 1987, but you know, 3 out of the first 4 have been in eras pre-LeBron, but everybody tell you that basketball was weak back then. Funny, huh? But anyway, 1987. Now, this draft presented a lot of great and very good players. All right, this draft was held in New York City on June 22nd, 1987. And in this particular draft, you had 2 future members of the NBA 50 greatest players, the original 50 greatest picked in this draft. Scottie Pippen, which probably wasn't projected back then that he'd be a top 50 greatest, and David Robinson. Now, of course, even though the Spurs had the rights to David Robinson, because of his service commitment with the United States Navy, he would not be available for another 2 years. So he didn't actually make his debut in the NBA until 1989. But those were 2 of the greatest top 50s. Another member of the top 75, not top 50, but top 75 that was included in that draft was none other than Reggie Miller. Of course, Reggie Miller was picked by the Pacers. And let's just go through this NBA draft to show you some of the really good players that we would see over the next 10 to 15 years. Number 1 in that draft was David Robinson. Of course, David Robinson was a 2-time NBA champion with San Antonio Spurs. Before Tim Duncan, he was the greatest Spur of all time. Now it's considered by most to be the second greatest Spur of all time. We got to see how Victor Wembanyama's career goes before, we could put him in that trajectory. But of course, David Robinson, before the knee injury in 1996, man, Robinson was right up there with Olajuwon, man, as far as his versatility, and he was more athletic than Olajuwon. He was a great two-way player, great defensive player, great shot blocker, great scorer. The only thing is that, that held David Robinson back, great rebounder. Led the league in rebounding, I believe, 1990-91. The only thing that held David Robinson back was that he was just too much of a nice guy, many people would say. Just too nice. If you would have put Calvin Murphy's personality in his body, man, David Robinson would have been an unbelievable force of nature. But still a great player. Number 2 in that draft, Armand Gilliam. The late Armand Gilliam out of UNLV, drafted by the Phoenix Suns. Armand Gilliam had a nice career. I remember him playing with the Philadelphia 76ers, Milwaukee Bucks, other teams too. I just can't think off the top of my head. He had a long journeyman type career. Dennis Hopson out of Ohio State, drafted by New Jersey Nets, was a bust. I believe he was on that 91 championship team by the Bulls. But yeah, he was indeed a bust. Number 4, Reggie Williams out of Georgetown, drafted by the Los Angeles Clippers. Reggie Williams was a small forward. And, he was a pretty good player. 13, 15 points per game, I guess, during his heyday. Won the NCAA championship in 1984. Was on that championship team. But number 5 in the draft was Scottie Pippen, or Scott Pippen, out of Central Arkansas. Was originally drafted by the Sonics, but he was traded to the Bulls in exchange for Olden Polynice. And I believe he was traded because Brad Sellers, the Bulls didn't have a lot of confidence in him. And ultimately that proved to be a masterstroke by Jerry Krause. And even though we rag on Scottie Pippen a little bit, you know what I'm saying, he was a great player. 6 NBA championships, great defensive player. A very good athlete, long, you know what I'm saying, was very strideful, was a sneaky ass dunker, sneaky power dunker, slasher in his younger days. Never developed a great jump shot, but he did develop a decent bank shot. One of the last bankers. Of course, he wasn't on the level of Tim Duncan. But, you know what I'm saying, he was a serviceable rodman to Michael Jordan's Batman, and like I said, part of a dynamic duo that dominated the NBA in the 1990s. And for a couple of years was even an MVP caliber candidate. Number 6 in that draft was Kenny Smith, North Carolina, drafted by Sacramento Kings. But of course, I think most people associate Kenny Smith with the Rockets, although he did also play with the Atlanta Hawks, and later on in his career had a short stint with, I think, the Nuggets and the Pistons. Number 7, KJ, Kevin Johnson, out of California, drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, which might shock some people that he was drafted by Cleveland. Played a couple years in Cleveland, but of course spent the vast majority of his career with the Phoenix Suns. And I believe, had it not been for both injuries and the scandal he got into, I believe he'd be a Hall of Famer. Now, of course, number 8 is Olden Polynice, and of course, Olden Polynice wound up going to Seattle for the Scottie Pippen trade. Derek McKee was in this particular draft out of Alabama, drafted by the Seattle Supersonics. I also remember Derek McKee later on in his last productive years playing with the Pacers. Horace Grant, who keeps being criminally forgotten by Bulls fans for some reason, out of Clemson, 6'10", 215 when he was drafted, bulked up to about 235, was an integral piece, I should say, of those championship teams in the early 90s, and also was a valuable asset and a veteran presence on those Orlando Magic teams in the mid-90s. Number 11, let's just name some of these players. I know you're going to recognize a lot of these names. Reggie Miller, of course, Hall of Famer. 2,560 three-pointers made. Curiously enough, never won a three-point contest, although he entered it numerous times. 39.5% career three-point shooter. One of the great clutch performers I've ever seen in my life. One of the great clutch three-point shooters I've ever seen. Muggsy Bogues, out of Wake Forest. Reggie Miller out of UCLA. Drafted by the Washington Bullets. Of course, Muggsy Bogues is best known for his years with the Charlotte Hornets, where he was a borderline perennial all-star for a few years. Despite his height, he was an effective player who became a decent shooter, a great free throw shooter, and he has the best assist-to-turn ratio in the history of the NBA. Joe Wolf, North Carolina. Let's see who else is in this draft. Mark Jackson, of course, out of St. John's. Hand down, man down. Over 10,000 career assists. Ken Norman was in this draft. Reggie Lewis, the ill-fated Reggie Lewis, was 22nd, picked by out of Northeastern, picked by the Boston Celtics. Greg Cadillac Anderson was in this draft. out of Houston, picked by the Spurs. Steve Alford, who was the Indiana faithful, who they wished that the Pacers had picked. Dallas picked him. They were very picked. Pacers fans was very pissed off initially that the Pacers organization picked Reggie over Steve Alford, but that'll be forgotten in about 2 years. Who else is in this draft? I see. Vincent Askew was in this draft. Brad Lohaus was in this draft. Donald Royal was in this draft. But was that the same Donald Royal that had that bullshit ass triple double with the Orlando Magic back in like '96? I think that was him. Still looking. I think that's about it. Kevin Gamble. Billy Donovan. Out of Providence. Drafted by Utah Jazz. He might make a good coach one day. Or not. Chris Dudley. The worst free throw shooter. One of the worst free throw shooters ever. The late, not so great Jack Haley. Drafted by the Bulls. Out of UCLA. And the rest of these guys. Sarunas Marciulionis, drafted by the Golden State Warriors that year. Sarunas Marciulionis. Let me see something. 6'5", 200 pounds. Played in the NBA from 1981 to played in the NBA from 1987 to 1997. And in his NBA career, he averaged 12.8 points. But I'm trying to see his best years. I want to say his best years was like the early 90s. Okay, in 91, 92, he had one season where he played 72 games. And even though he only started 5 and 29 minutes per game, he averaged almost 19 points per game that year. And the next year, he averaged 17. So between 1991 and 1993, those were his best years. Between those two seasons, Marciulionis averaged 18.5 points, 3 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.6 steals, 54% shooting from the floor, 78% from the foul line. So that was the 1987 NBA draft. A lot of really, 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 really good players, man. A lot of championship caliber players we would see in NBA finals, conference games, great role players, great contributors to championship teams or really good teams. All in that critical NBA draft. And my opinion, it's the 7th greatest draft in NBA history. But tell me what you guys think.